just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, Friday Jobber on the 13th of April 2018. Happy Friday the 13th to those that look forward to it. And perhaps, I think I heard somewhere today, this is partially an April Fool's joke and partially wishful thinking. You could win a free trip to see DJ Trump for a few minutes while he watches Fox News. No doubt it would be an interesting adventure. No idea what DJ would be doing other than that. Evidently he's working out details to meet Field Marshal the leader of the Democratic Republic of Korea. He's also putting the finishing touches on his possible strikes on the Syrian government, along with his cronies, France and the UK. President Macron claims he has some type of evidence. We haven't seen his evidence yet. It's the same characters that, if you recall, Niger and the weapons of mass destruction. That was a former French colony on the African continent, Niger. We have to talk about that and put it in the proper context with the French and various other characters here. We'll see how that works out. I think we talked about probability theory on one of the casts. It basically goes like this. If a nation makes a threat, they have at least a 50-50, better than a 50-50 chance of winning. This goes back sort of on DJ Trump's deal-making stratagem. However, though, in international relations now, you're playing in a different ballpark. That theory came about under Wilsonian foreign policy, which today is in itself a foreign policy that has been discredited. Most of the world do not follow it. this is part of the problem with how we see and hear our news coverage, particularly in North America. Stories that are hyped here by the monopoly media, particularly as it relates to the Mideast. A lot of the newscasts here are covered from the angle or the prism of the Zionists that are there, and of the former colonial powers, i.e. the UK. The British were all over the place. In fact, they had all of Palestine. And then we go to the French that are in the mix, and somewhat to a lesser degree the Italians were in the mix also, and particularly in places like Libya and even in Somalia. But that given, these old colonial powers are not what they used to be. If you notice, even to take on a nation the size of Syria, they have to go in a coalition, in other words, to gang up, to get all their air forces together, all their naval forces, the missiles, to even do a campaign. Now that tells you from the surface what this problem is. And when you look at the political part of it, the geopolitical part, going to the UN trying to get resolutions is not possible. And if you look at just a head count, this is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but most of the world does not have an interest there. There are a billion plus people in both India and China, and they are not fixated on the same news articles as what you get in the U.S., in particular, in Britain, or in France. But in the U.S., people have never really been fixated on foreign policy, with the exception of military campaigns. Now, this came about sort of like an American first and nationalistic situation after the Great Patriotic War, when there was a fight against one and one thing only, fascism. Now, but what happened there was you then had a Cold War, and of course that was fostered by forces of capitalism. They put some character out of Wisconsin named Gunner Joe McCarthy, the same state that Paul Ryan comes from. Nonetheless, they were able to fixate the public on an anti-communist hysteria that later turned into the Cold War. It forced the Democratic Party, and in particular President Truman, to follow more of a Cold War policy. The same policy went to Lyndon Johnson. This whole idea of containing what they called communism in Asia, impossible to do. Workers' movements are homegrown. The Vietnamese people had a movement before these characters ever knew where Vietnam was. And this is one of the problems. They were sending working class young men to a war that they didn't know what it was about. They told them that they were protecting freedom. Freedom from what? The Vietnamese didn't have a navy to roll up in Long Beach. They did not have nuclear weapons, period. And the Chinese economy at the time, in the 60s, was a very small economy. Remember that Mao liberated China in 1949. Prior to that, there was fighting, and they were, of course, a Great Patriotic War. The capitalists were pushing the renegade Chiang Kai-shek, and he went on to Taiwan. And that's where that regime is still there. And that is how the old Wilsonian racist foreign policy divided up China. And they're still talking about a two-China policy. That's just flummery, period. There is no such thing as a two-China policy. There is a China policy. And then the extension of the so-called Cold War. The USSR is no more. The Russian Federation is there. It went from an international power that pushed internationalism to under a V.I. Putin, a nationalist type of setup, but they're not really, the Russian Federation, it is a federation, is not set up for that. But again, that is trying to mimic the last days of capitalism. You remember on the Schickengruber, that's Adolf Hitler. You also had Mussolini there. There's much talk of Mussolini's economic policies in what Paul Ryan was talking about. But actually what they're doing there is they're talking about in Portugal a man named Beto Salazar had a state capitalism, what Sarah Palin calls crony capitalism. Well, crony or not, it's state capitalism. What you do is you intertwine corporations more and more into the fabric of the government. That's what the late President Dwight David Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex. But you now not only have the military-industrial complex, you have the banking complex, the Wall Street complex, all in one, and shadow banking all thrown into one big happy family of government/private corporations. That's the whole idea. And what fits into that scenario? Libertarianism, ragged American individualism. That in itself, you have elect a president who is egocentric, like a DJ Trump. You'll hear a lot of people, and this goes back, we'll sedge this into our topic here from the folks in Charlotte, Virginia, and we always pay homage to Heather Heyer, who was murdered there by alt-right white supremacists, Bannon followers of Bannon. And Bannon's espousing the same thing, America First. That was a slogan, incidentally, of the fascists that in America that were promoting fascism, and they were also at the same time in a close alliance with Schickengruber, the fascists in Germany. The aviator Lindbergh was part of that movement, and that was one of the things that they had to put out. But that was in the American fabric, and that goes back to individualism. It also plays in to a certain religiosity. If you remember, Schickengruber claimed he was doing quote-unquote God's work. That's the same way with Gattens is in Missouri. The governor there is under charges of basically taking a woman into his basement and performing with her, consensual that is, bondage type acts. That's nothing illegal about that. But the problem is he lied about it, and on top of that, he's a family values man. Still talking about family values. He's talking about a witch hunt. This plays into the whole scenario. Now you have Mr. Comey is coming out with his book, Another Nail in the Republican Coffin. These things over time, there's a cumulative effect there. Comey, a lifelong Republican till recently, no doubt he's probably joining up with Bernie Sanders now. But what that shows you is that people move from that particular sphere. There's no secret that people in the military, overwhelmingly people in law enforcement to the FBI up, were Republicans. By and large, not everyone. There are people that are not, but by and large, and particularly a lot of the younger agents are there. Those are the people that, as quote-unquote, Giuliani knew there, and it's the same thing within the CIA, a lot of those people there. Now, some of the old CIA characters that came out of the predecessor to the CIA were more of a liberal bent, but that was during the Great War. And then you had the Cold Warriors there, and there's a whole progression of what was going on with these people. But you have to remember, in places like Janesville, Wisconsin, a primary working class enclave, but GM was a big employer there at one time. Ragged individualism ran amok. Why did it run amok? Because you had the working class there were paid on par with many lower and middle class people. They were earning $50,000, $60,000 a year at the time. but at the same time, culturally, they were in a different cultural setup that Paul Ryan tapped into. The idea of a free lunch, the idea of people, quote unquote, being on welfare, etc., when they were hard-working people. No doubt people in Janesville, as elsewhere, the struggles of the automobile industry, the Roofer brothers, and that's how they won where they were. But these workers had, for the most part, had long forgotten that. They saw themselves as, at least from the economic standpoint, part of the middle class. Not from the education or intellectual standpoint, but from that standpoint. So they were set out there that they were workers, and they were working. Other people were not working. They must have been lazy or whatever their story was. But now Janesville, Wisconsin is hit by opiate addiction. Much of the automobile industry is gone from there. So the standard of living is not what it used to be. And there's older people that utilize Medicare, which Paul Ryan wanted to eliminate. Social Security, which he wanted to privatize with Wall Street. We've seen recently what's happened with Wall Street up and down roller coaster over there, something that Bannon thinks it's not there. He made a lot of money, Bannon did, when he was at Goldman Sachs from Wall Street. But these are all the things that play in there. So now that you have this ragged individualism going on and an egocentric president beyond other so-called presidents that have been, they claim to have been egocentric, that sort of a big bank takes little bank. He's vacuumed up all of the little characters. So these little individualists out there saying, I'm an individualist, they don't exist anymore, literally. They're just penny ante characters out there, pawns for a day. Some are luckier than others, as Jesse Jackson used to say. Some people make it a trick through the system, an opening through the system. A little crony capitalism here, a little opening there. Being in the right place at the right time. And some people literally got rich during the Depression because there were opportunities out there. But you don't necessarily want a depression for most of the people. What we do know about the Depression, of course, that was caused by the economic policies of the administration of G.W. Bush. And people don't remember that. Even people in the racist parts of West Virginia. I remember interviewing this fella, and he said, well, we voted for Barack Obama, the in man, as basically he called him, but he was going to get some food sufficiency, some Medicaid, and whatever else he could get on the lean times, as Woody Guthrie used to say. But these are the kinds of things, these people are there, and some of the people that were fortunate enough to work in these automobile industries and other industries that were unionized and were able to get better pay than the teachers. Now, the teachers, while we're here, out in Oklahoma have ended their 10-day walkout. They have gotten some progress. And in other places, we'll go to a little capsule here from the news, our local source, before we go to Virginia. We did a program, incidentally, called Paul Ryan Beats It. We on many of these channels, and ask you to do at the public news services. What we'll go to for a little roundup here, we advertise them and recommend that you consume their information and donate to them. Nonetheless, the headline here is Cheyenne, Wyoming. Public education supporters in Wyoming are keeping a close eye on the latest teacher actions. The time a walkout yesterday in Arizona, where educators, along with parents, and it has to be done this way, community leaders marched in to schools calling for 20% raise and a boost in education spending. The director there, Nate Martin, the director of Better Wyoming, a group called Better Wyoming, said even though Wyoming legislature has has cut $100 million from public schools in the past 3 years. He doesn't expect to see teachers charging on the stages of the state capitol in Cheyenne anytime soon. Well, Wyoming is the state that Dick Cheney came out of, and obviously the education system there is deteriorating by the day. The legislature steering Arizona in the direction of these other states in terms of defunding its public schools, freezing teachers' salaries, shutting down schools, Martin said, although the blowback is going to be different and the trajectory is the same. Wyoming Constitution guarantees every student the right to an adequate education. So Martin says the school districts are likely to take their cases to court as a first action there, sort of called the NAACP stratagem. Lawmakers have pointed to the state's revenue shortfalls, largely due to still a stagnating energy sector as the prime cause. A wide range budget cuts, including public education. Now, this is one of the problems there with many of these states. They have the same problems, Venezuela, and the same problem is, to a certain extent, the Russian Federation, if they depend on just one industry, a raw material. And it's a commodity, so thus the price can go up, the price can come down. And they are suffering from that, and also with the fracking, more people are in the energy business. Let me finish this up. Present commitments to adequately fund public school education over the past decade has paid off. Recent scores rank the state students above the national average in all areas, with Wyoming fourth graders best in the nation in math. Very interesting. It's a small state. Public education is too important to hinge on volatile mineral markets, Martin says. So we need to come up with a new form of revenue to fund public education, whether or not people are accustomed to paying taxes. Martin noted Wyoming has one of the lowest sales and property taxes in the country. He argues that since the state is home to some of the nation's wealthiest members of the top 1%, implementing an income tax targeting those residents would help the state there. So one of the things that comes out of Wyoming, this is why we go to the public news service. Let's do the Arizona teachers while we're here, because we get news that is local, that the public news service puts out there that may not be from other people. Now, this is the walk-ins, a novel concept. This is the 11th out of Phoenix, Arizona. They are calling them walk-ins as Arizona teachers across the state protest today to demand higher pay. And let me make sure I got this. This is dated on the 11th, so been 2 days past. 1,000 public schools are expected to participate. Teachers, along with staff, parents, and community members have said they will march arm in arms into schools before the start of the day as a show of solidarity. The demand includes 20% raises, smaller class sizes, no new tax cuts until Arizona's per student spending reaches the national average. I was talking to a teacher. She was talking about how brutal it was in Arizona. Some teachers there have obviously left. We think it's going to be a very powerful thing to show the community support behind us, and we ultimately need to see our answers. That is from Nora Carvelis, an elementary music teacher in suburban Phoenix, who is helping Arizona Education United organize the walk-ins. The governor there, Ducey, said a 20% raise, which would cost more than $600 million, is out of the question. Teachers got a 1%. Now, see, this is the story across many last year, and Ducey proposes a budget allowing for another 1% this year. That's 2%. It's not keeping up with inflation. The National Education Association, the largest education, ranks Arizona among the lowest states for teachers' salaries and per pupil spending. Corvallis has said he chose his career because of his passion about education. It's as a second year, he's fairly new. He makes about $34,000 a year. He said recently he gave up his apartment because he was struggling to pay the rent. Now, this is unconscionable. In 2018, a teacher literally couldn't afford, I don't know what his rent was, but he had to move to a smaller accommodation. Corvallis Group's Arizona Education United formed just a few weeks ago and is drawing inspiration from teachers who stayed successful labor strikes in West Virginia and also in Oklahoma. So these are some of the demands out here that are coming about, and this goes back into Paul Ryan, why Paul Ryan was beating it. What you see is grassroots organizing. We had the Women's March, which the Republicans said wouldn't amount to anything. It amounted to a hell of a lot. And at the same time, the National Science March, that'll be repeated this weekend. And then you had the students from Parkland, Florida, marching against gun violence. In other words, that's more people organizing, hundreds of thousands of people organizing. And that does make a difference because they're organizing block by block, precinct by precinct. And the types of people running in many of those districts are progressive people. A lot of them, a lot of women running. So it's a completely new ball game. So the Republicans have to literally are forced to fight a very, very big ground game. We'll save some of this. We'll do Ohio because this is Medicaid. One of the things we've been covering coast to coast. This is in the state of Ohio. Ohio stands to lose with Medicaid work requirements. One of the geniuses came in Columbus is the dateline for the story. Despite being employed, some Ohioans have lost health coverage. Could lose it if the state implements a Medicaid work requirement. The Kasich administration plans to ask for federal approval to add a job requirement for able-bodied adults covered through the state's Medicaid expansion. The Center for Budget Priorities examined the impact of a similar initiative in Kentucky and found almost half of the low-income people who could be affected by Medicaid work requirements would risk losing coverage at least 1 month out of the year. The study's author Vera Aaron Dine, Vice President of Health Policy at the Center, says she thinks supporters don't understand the condition faced by low-income workers. It is simply not the case that people who want to and are trying to can necessarily find stable jobs at regular hours. This is Aaron Dine said. Instead, more Medicaid enrollees work in industries where both employment and hours are volatile. In other words, they're not getting enough work. She cites industries like food services, construction, retail, and home health care. The report found that red tape involved in reporting compliance could even cause some enrollees who meet the work requirement to lose medical coverage. Supporters have said the goal is to bring a measure of personal responsibility. Well, that doesn't make any sense because these people are already working to the Medicaid program with fair and reasonable work requirements. Aaron Dine says loss of coverage could lead to poor health outcomes. No doubt about that. Chronic illness can come in there and then the people would be applying for disability, whether they get it or not, doesn't matter, amongst working people who gain coverage through Medicaid expansion in Ohio. Majority said that Medicaid made it easier to keep working. That's hardly surprising when people get the right treatments for their diabetes or their heart conditions or their depression. They are more likely to be able to go to work every day. Well, no doubt about that, particularly with depression. Diabetes, they're on the way to the grave. According to state estimates, 36,000 Ohioans, risk losing health coverage on the proposal. That's about 5% of those who gained coverage through the expansion. So in other words, what this basically means is that the state would shed 36,000 workers from their roles, and that's the whole thing right there. It's basically a scheme with the Trump administration to make health care less affordable and less available. The whole idea behind the work requirement is that people will just disappear. This is Vera, what did we say? Aaron Dine, Raheen Kidray, and Matt Brokus. This is on the 11th. Many working people could lose health care coverage due to Medicaid. The recent Trump administration guidance for the first time let states take away Medicaid coverage from people who are not working or participating in work-related activities for a specific number of hours each month. The guidance allows the states to impose work requirements on adult Medicaid enrollees other than those who are 65 or older, pregnant, qualified for Medicaid benefits because they receive federal disability insurance. The requirement policy that the Center for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid approved was Kentucky's, under which enrollees could lose coverage if they failed to document 80 hours of work or work-related activities each month. So that's 20 hours basically a week. It has also approved requirement policies in Indiana, Arkansas, additional, and these are poverty-stricken states, particularly Arkansas. Medicaid requirements will almost certainly cause many low-income adults to lose their health coverage. That's the whole idea behind it. The coverage is most obviously threatened for enrollees who are not already working, who make up roughly 40% of the people on it. More than 80% of these enrollees report that they are unable to work due to illness or disability, and those barriers are set up there where people cannot qualify for disability that they are entitled to have. Many working people also will likely lose coverage due to the working requirement. Most non-elderly adult Medicaid enrollees work, but in low-wage jobs. And this is, we'll append this study here. Won't go over the whole thing, but basically what this is a catch-all scheme. Many workers who work substantial hours could lose coverage under Medicaid requirements. Workers worked fewer than 80 hours in at least 1 month. That's in Kentucky. That is 25%. 75% worked at least 80 hours in all months. The state work requirement policies, Kentucky was the first to get approved, no doubt about that, under their governor there. Missed out by working those hours on top of the standard requirement. Enrollees who fail to meet the requirement are given, have 1 month, given month to make it up. The missed hours by working those hours on top of the standard requirement. So in other words, they have to work 120 hours. If they work 40 hours the previous month, overall their coverage is suspended the following month, reinstated only in the month following a month in which they meet the requirements. In other words, they got to run out and work 120 hours under Blevin. Other state work requirements that generally allow enrollees to meet the requirement by completing activities other than a paid employment. So these are some of the schemes that they have here. The key findings here, consistent with other research, we find that most, two-thirds of the non-elderly low-income adults who have incomes below the current Medicaid eligibility limit worked at some point during 2012-2013. Of those, most worked substantial hours over the course of the year, suggesting strong attachment to the labor force. 9 in 10 worked at least 500 hours, and over 70% worked at least 1,000 hours on the average. That's about 80 hours per month. So this is where they are. Let's go to our friends at the University of Virginia, Larry Sabato, the exit of Paul Ryan. He has exited, and we talked about Janesville there. These are some of the new ratings there. Ross, that's Florida 15. And is likely Republican, was safe Republican. Jenkins, number in Kansas, that's an open seat there. It's a toss-up. Ryan's seat was also moved to a toss-up. The question of what to do with Wisconsin 1, our ratings now, is open, somewhat vexing. The seat is to the center right. We went through that, so we won't go back there. He won it by, D.J. Trump won the district by 10 points. That's not unusual, but you have to look at D.J. Trump and what the turnout was in that district by 10 points is not unusual, and whom he was running against. Hillary the Monster Clinton. I don't know what Jill Stein did there. Maybe we'll look it up. Let's see what else is going on here. Ryan had easily won the seat in every election since his initial victory. That was in 1998 when he defeated the seat from Republicans after the former person there, Newman, left to make the first of several unsuccessful bids for statewide office. Newman first won the seat in 1994. Defeating then Peter Barker, who had beaten Newman in 1993. That was when O.J. was in jail, and this was a special election necessitated by the long-serving... Oh, this is Les Aspen's old seat. I didn't know that. Former Les Aspen. It was a good man when he moved to be Secretary of State. That was under Wild Bill Clinton. Aspen's tenure of the Defense Department was short and unhappy. He only served for about a year. Of course, he died in 1995. Les Aspen. I hadn't thought of Les Aspen in a while. Didn't know that was his district. But the district had changed considerably. Les Aspen was an expert on defense matters, of all things. And he kept, as they say, the money coming in. Districts, a Republican was on display, and at least weakened the state Supreme Courts when the conservative, let's see, who is it? Michael Shenrock carried the district by about 5 points, despite losing by 11 nationwide. Now, statewide. Now, this was, I believe, the race they're talking about there. Oh, the Supreme Court race. So 5 points there. Liberal judge out of Milwaukee. Probably a lower turnout. We'd have to check on that. Many will vote Ryan's retirement as many view it as a concession that the Republicans are resigned to losing the House in the fall. Well, yeah, that has been widely said. and is going on out there. There are now 13 Republican held open seats rated as toss-ups. That is a lot of toss-ups to have, and it appears it's not getting any better. What happens when you hear in the news that Ryan says, well, we're going to lose anyway, so I'm getting out while the getting out is good? Well, that takes on an aura of its own. And then you have situations on the ground like what's happening in Missouri, and that's a further erosion of, quote-unquote, the Republican brand. Now, I'm not here to say now, this is some of the ratings here out of California. Another toss-up denim there. Knight, this is in California 10, California 25. Robin Batcher, 48. Coleman, this is in Colorado. Cabela in Florida. Ron Bloom in Iowa, 1. That's a toss-up. He's been around, but on Jason Lewis, Minnesota, 2. Paulson, Minnesota, 3. Those were pretty solid, I think. In fact, is it Lewis? Is in Michelle Bachmann's old district. I'm not sure about that right now. But anyway, nonetheless, Fesco, John Fesco, New York, 19. Tierney, Claudia Tierney, New York, 22. And he goes on and on and on. Barbara Comstock in Virginia, yeah. That's 10. Then we got some open seats here. Wisconsin 1. Wisconsin 8. Washington 8. Yeah, that's always been it. Some been lean Republican here. Pete Sessions down in Texas. Mia Love in Utah. Just some that you probably recognize the name. Karen Handel in Georgia 6. And then we have likely Republicans here. French Hill, that's in Arizona 2. Rodney Davis, Illinois 13. These names you even recognize? Probably not. Dave Bratt, he's the man that flew out the former House Majority Leader. I think his name right now. And C.M. Rogers, she's out in Washington State 5. That's a conservative district out in Washington State. And who else here? Goffman, I don't know. That's what, Wisconsin 6. I'm not familiar with that particular district. Rodney Davis, Illinois 13. That's a very right-wing district there. And with the, let's go down here. Oops. To some of the the Democrats, some toss-ups, 2 of them in Minnesota, the 1st and the 8th, Waltz and Nolan, that is in northern Minnesota, one in southern Minnesota, and the state one is open, that is Pennsylvania 5. Leans Democrat, McSally in Arizona, California, where old Alarm Darrell Issa used to be, that is open district there. Rolf Latham, that's Florida 27, it is open. And several of these other districts here, Rosen is in Nevada, 2 of those are open. And likely Democrats, so Halloran, that's in Arizona 1. There's an open one also in Arizona 9. Army Bira, California 7. Another one here. There's an open, Esty resigned. That's in Connecticut. And Charlie DeTuna Chris, Florida 13. Murphy, Florida 7. Peterson, Minnesota 7. Goffenmeyer, Jersey 5. And Cartwright, Pennsylvania 8. And that is where those districts shape up. We'll do a little roundup of the Washington Post. We'll get most of this on the week that was. We pretty much done that. We'll have more on Mr. Kumi's book later. This attorney here, Cohen, is known for taping conversations, now the President's allies, where the FBI has a recording. No doubt about that, they do. And we don't know which ones he taped. Nothing illegal about taping a person. Many times when you call various commercial enterprises, governmental enterprises, whether it be Social Security, etc., they always say that this is being recorded for training purposes. Well, if you get into a situation like that where they're recording you, you have the right to record them. That's not even a debate right there. You can record them, they can record you, and everybody is happy. And in fact, do protect yourself. Now, in some states, it's perfectly legal to record a person. Trump's expected to pardon a former Cheney aide, Scooter Libby. I hadn't heard anything about Scooter Libby. Well, anyway. And ODJ has ordered a review of Postal Service business model. So what? He can do nothing about it. In addition, executive order forming an administration task force to be chaired by Steve Mnuchin to evaluate the Postal Service finances and obligation. The order directs the task force to issue a report. The order that the Postal Service has incurred, $65 billion losses since the Great Recession Depression. It must change so that it operates on a sustainable business model. But it has nothing to do with it. The Postal Service is an independent corporation. It's to bet the steep decline in first-class volume, coupled with a legal mandate that compels the Social Security, the Postal Service to incur substantial and inflexible costs. Part of it is with their people. The order is not single out Amazon by name, but Bales, of course, in his association with the Washington Post, he owns it. Aides have repeatedly pointed to Trump that the online retailer is not to blame for the Postal Service's woes, but has not been assessed. It's unclear why he abruptly ordered a review of the Postal Service, but he's gotten several briefings on the service in the past 6 months. His order makes the first official action to potentially changing the business structure of the Postal Service. Last but last out there. But the problem, since it's an independent corporation and given the political wherewithal here, it's not going to happen. Trump's not in a very good position to order anything, and that's part of the problem. Evidently, another little headline here. Paul Ryan, forced to resist calls to step aside for a quick transition. I'm not going to have any quick transition to a new speaker. They're going to wait until actually the cards and chips come in after the 2018 fall election. So these are some of the items here that we covered today, and we'll be covering many more items for the week that it was. Particularly, we'll look back at some of the teacher strikes. There were quite a few of them going on, particularly in Oklahoma, what they got, what they didn't get. The Paul Ryan thing, we'll sort of review that. We've already sort of deadheaded it there. And Mr. Kumi's book, well, we'll see what we can do about it. I'm not sure how many reviewers have, as they say, came out there so far with reviews, copies, but he'll make the talk show, so probably that particular item will be on the Monday morning quarterback after some of the Sunday talk shows. I'm not certain what interviews he's giving, but Kumi is giving, but given the veracity of his revelations there, we're going to see a lot of that. We tried to, at WBRN, stay out of a lot of the National Enquirer type just gossip. We don't like to do that. We try to deal more with substantive stuff, polling as we can. And we'll look at the polls tomorrow, the week that was. We usually go over these polls so we can get all of them out there. I saw an article someplace on the NCAA and March Madness, and ratings from the cable part of the network, they were down, but that is pretty much to be expected because of the position of cable. We'll talk more about that on our sports program, All About Sports, where we deal more with the economics of sports, and we'll have a chance to cover that. It's just that so many things are popping up at once that we need to start paying attention to it, and that we shall do. In the NBA, let's see what we had on the... whoops. Oh, that's right. We're in the playoffs now. Anyway, we've ended the regular season of the NBA, and just some we won't give where they are. So we'll move on to baseball. We will say with the Spurs, Ed will be at the Warriors. To Major League Baseball, and poor Cubbies. Cubbies got drilled again. Pirates 6-1 in Wrigley Field. The Pirates had 9 hits, no errors, and the Cubbies had 7 hits, 3 errors. Forget it. Mr. Hendricks, Kyle Hendricks was the loser. Mr. Williams was the winner. The Tigers were in Cleveland 9-3. The Cardinals were in Cincy. Cardinals 13-4. Cardinals playing pretty good ball. The Rockets... wait a minute, hold it. The Rockies, were at the Nationals. It was all Rockies, 5-1 in D.C. The Yankees were in Fenway Park, and it was all Red Sox, 5-3 over the Yankees. The Red Sox had 8 hits, 2 errors, and the Yankees 4 hits and 1 error. And the loser was Mr. Gray. Mr. Kimball got the save. Okay. The White Sox were in Minnesota and got shut out there by the Twins 4-0. The Angels were in Kansas City, Angels 7-1. And finally, the Giants were down in San Diego and shut out the Padres 7-0. Stanton was the winner, and Mitchell had the loss. On to the National Hockey League. I'm not sure what we got going here. The Devils and the Lightning. It was the Lightning 5-2. The Maple Leafs and Bruins 6-1. The Bruins, it was the win in Boston. The Blue Jackets and the Capitals. Blue Jackets 4-3 in an overtime thing. The Avalanche and the Predators. Hellacious Weather thing going there. Anyway, 5-2 was the final there. And finally, the Sharks and our friends, the Anaheim Ducks. I like that name, but the poor Ducks. The Sharks devoured the Ducks. 3-0 was the final score there. So let's see very, very quickly here. Look at some of the polling. Always tempted to look at the polling as a former poster. And now we're a modeler. Anyway, doesn't matter. We stay very close to the statistical world. And I'll have to go and visit old Nate Sue. We haven't visited Mr. The handicapper. We haven't visited him lately either. In fact, it's been a couple of months, I guess, since we have visited him. There were a lot of polling out on Wednesday. The Economist was out there. They had old DJ at 42. Reuters 839. Rasmussen at 45. Quantipec had generic ballot. Very tight generic ballot here. 46-43 by 3 points. Let's see who else we have. Generic ballot here by 10 from Reuters. The Economist, YouGov, Web poll, Dems up by 8 Quantipac, we mess with a commercial. The congressional, it's so low, but when you get 12, 19, things like that. But Quantipac had, on Tuesday, had DJ Trump at 41. We have to report that. And on Thursday, Rasmussen, an outliner here, had old DJ Trump at 50 and 49 and disapproved. Unbelievable. Anyway, Mama had, this is in New Jersey with Hughes and Menendez. Mr. Menendez up by 21 there. And Mason Dixon, this is the Missouri race here at McCassell by 1. In other words, that race is tight as you go against Hockley. So that was Mason Dixon there. So that's the latest we have on our polling. And this will do it for us. We have Numbers Man, that's our macroeconomic program from WBRN. And on the Boston Red Network, that will come this weekend. We'll have an open source report. We'll talk about Mozilla's Foxfire and what is called containers in Facebook. And they are moving more to containers. We'll talk about the technology of containers. A very interesting situation. And you can also do various topics and put them in a container. So we'll be talking about that and look forward to talking about that. We have to do a little research on the matter. And I don't know if we'll get to all about sports or not. We will see what we see. Tax day is coming up. That will be on the 16th. The 15th is usually the tax day, but that falls on a Sunday. So therefore, on Monday, mailing for those people who have not mailed out a return or get an extension. You pay the tax. But the whole thing is you basically automatically will get an extension. And unless they've changed the rules, that's to August, you can get another extension and you can keep on extending your way along. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on Saturday morning on these very same stations.